In 1859 Nevada Territory, the wealthy families of Copper Ridge invited washwoman Isabel Crawford to their grand harvest social, as nothing more than a cruel joke, never expecting her to actually attend. But when she stepped through those ballroom doors in burgundy velvet that transformed her into pure elegance, the entire town fell into stunned silence, and suddenly everyone realized they had gravely underestimated the woman they thought they knew. Would this mysterious transformation expose the town's cruelty, or would Isabel finally claim the respect she had always deserved? The letter fell from Isabel's shaking hands like a dying leaf in the Nevada wind. She had been scrubbing clothes behind their tiny cabin when young Tommy Fletcher ran up, breathless and grinning, to deliver what he called fancy mail for the washerwoman. Now, staring at the elegant invitation to the Copper Ridge Harvest Social, Isabel felt her heart pound against her ribs. The beautiful writing spelled out her name, Miss Isabel Crawford, right there between the mayor's family and the banker's wife. But something felt wrong about it, like honey mixed with poison. "Mama," she called through the thin cabin walls. "We got invited to the big dance." Her mother's cough echoed from inside before she appeared in the doorway, pale and thin as winter wheat. "Let me see that, child." She took the invitation with trembling fingers, her eyes narrowing as she read. 1859 has been a year of surprises, but this. She shook her head slowly. Isabel watched her mother's face change from confusion to something darker. "What is it?" "They invite everyone, dear. Rich folks, poor folks, even us. Makes them feel generous." Her mother's voice carried years of hurt. "But there's a difference between being invited and being wanted." The sound of horses made them both look up. 3 young men rode past their cabin, dressed in fine suits and polished boots. One of them pointed at their laundry line and said something that made the others laugh loud enough to hear. Isabel's cheeks burned hot as desert sand. "Maybe I shouldn't go," she whispered. Her mother studied her daughter's face, the smooth skin, the bright eyes, the way she held herself even when embarrassed. "Or maybe it's time you did." That evening, Isabel walked to the edge of town where Martha Henley's dress shop sat like a forgotten treasure box. The old seamstress worked late by lamplight, her needle dancing through expensive fabric for wealthy customers who never thanked her properly. Martha looked up when the bell chimed, surprised to see the washwoman's daughter. "Evening, Isabel. What brings you here so late?" "I need help," Isabel said simply. "I want to go to the dance, but I have nothing to wear except my church dress." Martha set down her work and really looked at the young woman before her. Something in Isabel's eyes reminded her of another girl, long ago, who had dreams bigger than her circumstances. "Come here, child. Let me see what we're working with." As Martha circled her with measuring eyes, Isabel felt both hope and terror fighting in her chest. The dance was in 3 days. 3 days to become someone worthy of that elegant invitation, or 3 days to prepare for the biggest mistake of her life. "I knew your grandmother," Martha said suddenly. Beautiful woman, proud too, maybe too proud for her own good. She paused by an old trunk in the corner. "She left something here before she died. Said it was for you when the time was right." Isabel's breath caught. What kind of something? Martha's weathered hands touched the trunk's brass lock. "Something that might change everything, dear girl. Question is, are you ready for everything to change?" Martha's hands trembled as she lifted the trunk's heavy lid, and Isabel gasped at what lay inside. Burgundy velvet gleamed like dark wine in the lamplight, rich and smooth as anything she'd ever seen. Gold thread wound through the fabric in patterns that looked like they belonged in a palace, not a frontier dress shop. "This can't be for me," Isabel breathed, afraid to touch something so beautiful. "Your grandmother was quite the lady before hard times hit," Martha said, lifting the gown carefully. "European nobility ran in her blood, even if money didn't run in her pockets. She made me promise to keep this safe until you were old enough to understand what it meant." Isabel reached out with one finger to trace the golden embroidery. The dress felt like touching a dream. But why hide it away? Why not wear it herself? Martha's eyes grew distant. "Pride, child. She'd rather go without than have folks think she was putting on airs above her station. But she wanted you to have the choice she never gave herself." The front door chimed again, and both women froze. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor, and Sheriff Morrison appeared in the backroom doorway. His badge caught the lamplight as his eyes moved from Martha to Isabel to the magnificent dress. "Evening, ladies," he said in his gruff voice. "Heard there was some commotion over here. Light burning late, voices carrying." "Just fitting a dress," Martha replied quickly, but her voice shook. Sheriff Morrison stepped closer, studying the gown with interest that made Isabel uncomfortable. "That's some fancy work. Must be worth more than most folks in this town make in a year." His eyes fixed on Isabel. "You planning to wear that to the dance, girl?" "I maybe," Isabel managed. The sheriff's laugh had no warmth in it. "Interesting choice. Folks might wonder where a washwoman got hold of such finery. Might start asking questions about how honest work pays for such luxuries." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Isabel understood perfectly. Wear the dress and face suspicion about where it came from. Stay home and remain invisible forever. "The dress belongs to her family," Martha said firmly. "Legitimate inheritance, every stitch of it." "Course it is," Sheriff Morrison nodded, but his smile suggested he didn't believe a word. "Just hope everyone else sees it that way, come dance night." He touched his hat brim mockingly. "Good evening, ladies." After he left, the room felt colder. Isabel sank into a chair, her dreams crumbling like old paper. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should just stay home where I belong. "Listen to me, child." Martha knelt beside her, gripping her hands. "Your grandmother faced down harder men than Sheriff Morrison. She walked through rooms full of people who wanted to see her fail, and she did it with her head high and her heart brave. But what if they're right? What if I don't belong there?" Martha stood and held up the dress again, letting the fabric catch every bit of lamplight. "This gown was made for a queen, Isabel. Not because of money or title, but because of the spirit inside the woman who wears it. Your grandmother saw that spirit in you before you were even born." Isabel looked at her reflection in Martha's cracked mirror. For just a moment, she could almost see what her grandmother had seen, not just a poor girl who washed clothes, but someone capable of greatness. "Will you help me?" she asked quietly. "Every step of the way," Martha promised. "But remember, once you put on that dress, once you walk into that ballroom, there's no going back. You'll be claiming your place in this world, and not everyone will like it." The clock on the wall chimed 10 times, 2 days until the dance, 2 days to find the courage her grandmother had tried to pass down through burgundy velvet and golden thread. "You look like a princess from those fairy tale books," whispered her mother as Isabel turned away from the cracked mirror in their small cabin. The burgundy dress fit her body like it was made just for her. Every stitch seemed perfect. The gold thread caught the lamplight and sparkled like tiny stars. Her dark hair was pinned up in a fancy style she had practiced from a torn magazine page. Around her neck hung her mother's only pearl necklace, the last pretty thing they owned. But as Isabel stepped outside into the cool evening air, her stomach felt like it was full of jumping frogs. Down the dusty street, she could see the Grand Hotel all lit up with warm yellow light. Music drifted through the open windows. Ladies in beautiful gowns walked arm in arm with men in their best suits. They looked like they belonged in a painting. Her bare hands started shaking. What was she thinking? These people had money, education, and fancy manners. She washed their dirty clothes for pennies. She lived in a tiny cabin that leaked when it rained. Her fingernails were clean tonight, but tomorrow they would be stained again from soap and hard work. A group of young men in expensive coats walked past, laughing loudly about something. One of them glanced at her cabin and wrinkled his nose like he smelled something bad. They didn't even notice her standing there in her grandmother's dress. "Maybe I should stay home," she whispered to herself. Then she remembered Martha's words from the dress shop. Beauty knows beauty. The old seamstress had trusted her with this secret dress. Her grandmother had saved it for this exact moment. Not for a party or celebration, but for the day when Isabel would need to remember who she really was inside. She thought about all the years of staying quiet, keeping her head down, accepting that she was less important than everyone else. Tonight felt different. Tonight, something burned in her chest like a warm fire. The sound of violin music grew louder as she walked toward the hotel. Her new shoes clicked against the wooden sidewalk. With each step, she stood a little taller. The dress moved around her like liquid magic. As she got closer to the bright hotel entrance, she saw familiar faces through the windows. Victoria Ashford stood near a table covered with fancy food, surrounded by her usual group of friends. They were all wearing expensive dresses, but none of them looked as elegant as the gown Isabel wore. Her heart pounded faster. These people had ignored her, looked through her like she was invisible, treated her like she didn't matter. But tonight, everything would change. She reached for the heavy wooden door handle, took one deep breath, and stepped forward into a room that would never be the same again. The moment Isabel walked into the ballroom, every single conversation stopped like someone had blown out a candle. Every head turned toward the door. Every pair of eyes grew wide with surprise. The musicians kept playing their waltz, but nobody was listening anymore. The room full of Copper Ridge's finest citizens stood frozen like statues, staring at the young woman who had just entered their private world. "Good Lord," someone whispered near the punch bowl. Isabel moved forward with smooth, confident steps. Her burgundy gown caught the light from dozens of oil lamps hanging from the ceiling. The gold embroidery seemed to glow with each movement. Her head was held high, and her dark eyes sparkled with quiet strength. Victoria Ashford dropped her crystal cup of lemonade. It hit the floor with a sharp crash, but she didn't even notice. Her mouth hung open like she was trying to catch flies. Next to her, the mayor's wife grabbed her husband's arm so hard he winced. Is that really?" the banker's son started to say, but couldn't finish his sentence. Near the dance floor, David Sullivan stopped talking to his friends and straightened his black tie with nervous fingers. He had always been the most handsome young man in town, with his blonde hair and blue eyes. But tonight, he looked like he was seeing a ghost, or maybe an angel. The crowd parted as Isabel walked deeper into the room. Ladies in silk dresses stepped aside, their jewelry catching the lamplight but seeming dim compared to the natural glow that surrounded the newcomer. Men adjusted their bow ties and stood up straighter, suddenly aware of their posture. "She's beautiful," whispered Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife. "How did we never notice before?" But Isabel had always been beautiful. The difference was that tonight she believed it herself. Tonight, she wore her grandmother's dress like armor made of velvet and gold. Tonight, she moved like she belonged in any room she entered. An older gentleman with a white mustache approached her first. "Miss Crawford, isn't it? You look absolutely lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Patterson," she replied with a small smile. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying across the quiet room. The spell began to break. People started whispering to each other behind their fans and gloved hands. Some looked amazed. Others seemed confused or even angry. How dare the washerwoman's daughter look more elegant than their own daughters? But David Sullivan saw only one thing. He saw the woman he should have noticed years ago, walking toward him like destiny dressed in burgundy velvet. His heart hammered against his chest as he realized he was about to do something that would change everything. He took a step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of her. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The music stopped completely when David Sullivan walked straight across the dance floor toward Isabel. Every person in that ballroom held their breath, watching the most eligible bachelor in Copper Ridge ignore every other woman in the room. "Miss Crawford," he said, his voice carrying through the silence like a church bell, "would you honor me with this dance?" Isabel felt her heart pound against her ribs. She had watched David from afar for months, admiring his kindness to the shopkeepers and his gentle way with children. Now he stood before her, his hand extended, his eyes filled with something she had never seen directed at her before, genuine admiration. I would be delighted," she whispered, placing her gloved hand in his. The orchestra began a slow waltz, and David led her onto the polished wooden floor. Other couples stepped back, creating a circle around them like they were the king and queen of the evening. Isabel's burgundy dress flowed with each turn, the gold thread catching the lamplight and making her look like she was wrapped in liquid fire. "You're trembling," David said softly as they spun together. "I've never danced at a real ball before," Isabel admitted, though she moved with perfect grace thanks to her grandmother's old lessons. "You could have fooled me. You dance like you were born for this." His hand tightened gently on her waist. "Tell me, Miss Crawford, why haven't I seen you at these gatherings before?" Isabel glanced around at the watching faces, some curious, some jealous, some openly shocked. "People like me don't usually attend events like this." "People like you?" David's eyebrows rose. "You mean beautiful, intelligent women with perfect manners?" Heat rushed to Isabel's cheeks. "I mean poor people, Mr. Sullivan. People who wash other people's clothes for a living." David spun her expertly, and when she came back into his arms, his expression had grown serious. Do you know what I do for a living, Miss Crawford? You work at your father's newspaper. I write stories. And the most important lesson my father taught me is that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account. He guided her through a series of elegant steps that made her feel like she was floating. It has everything to do with their character. As the waltz continued, Isabel noticed other things happening around the ballroom. Victoria Ashford stood near the refreshment table, her face twisted with something ugly. She whispered urgently to 3 other wealthy young ladies, their heads bent together like conspirators planning something terrible. Meanwhile, older gentlemen nodded approvingly as they watched David and Isabel dance. The mayor himself smiled and raised his glass in their direction. But the younger men looked confused and perhaps a little jealous that David had chosen the washwoman over all the eligible daughters of rich families. Miss Crawford, David said as the music began to slow, might I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could take a walk together. Before Isabel could answer, she saw Victoria Ashford approaching through the crowd, her silk dress rustling with each determined step. The banker's daughter wore a smile that reminded Isabel of a snake preparing to strike. Oh, how lovely, Victoria called out sweetly as the music ended. David, darling, you simply must introduce me properly to your new friend. The way Victoria said the word friend made Isabel's stomach drop. She recognized that tone, the same one the wealthy ladies used when they brought their laundry to her cabin and spoke to her like she was a child. David's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Victoria had already positioned herself between them, her predatory smile growing wider. Miss Crawford, isn't it? Victoria's voice dripped honey, but her eyes glittered like broken glass. What an absolutely stunning transformation. You look so different from when I see you carrying laundry baskets through town. A circle of people gathered around them, sensing drama like vultures circling prey. The ballroom grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt dangerous rather than admiring. Thank you, Miss Ashford, Isabel replied carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the warning bells ringing in her head. That dress, Victoria continued, circling Isabel slowly like a judge examining evidence. Such exquisite fabric, such detailed embroidery. It must have cost a fortune. Tell me, wherever did you find the money for such a magnificent gown? The question hit the ballroom like a thunderclap. Conversation stopped at nearby tables. Gentlemen lowered their drinks. Ladies leaned forward to catch every word. Everyone knew that Isabel Crawford lived in a tiny cabin and barely earned enough to keep her sick mother fed and warm. It belonged to my grandmother, Isabel answered, lifting her chin proudly. Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking crystal. How convenient! And I suppose your grandmother was a wealthy socialite who simply forgot to mention her fortune before she died. Several people gasped. Even by the standards of 1859 society, Victoria's words crossed a line. You didn't speak ill of the dead, and you didn't publicly humiliate someone at a social gathering. David stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Miss Ashford, that's quite enough. Oh, but David, Victoria interrupted, her voice rising so everyone could hear. I'm simply curious about our mysterious Cinderella. After all, we must be careful about who we invite into polite society. Some people might get ideas above their station. The words stung like slaps across Isabel's face. She felt her cheeks burn with shame and fury. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, hungry for scandal. She could see the excitement in their eyes. They wanted to watch her crumble, wanted to see the poor girl put back in her proper place. But something strange happened as Isabel stood there, surrounded by hostile faces and cruel whispers. Instead of shrinking back into herself like she always had before, she felt something powerful rising in her chest. It was like a fire catching wind, growing stronger with each breath. You're absolutely right, Miss Ashford, Isabel said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. I do have ideas above my station. I had the wild idea that I might be treated with basic human kindness. I had the crazy notion that my worth might be measured by something other than the coins in my purse. She took a step toward Victoria, who actually backed away in surprise. But mostly, I had the foolish idea that people who call themselves Christians and civilized might actually behave that way when tested. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people looked ashamed. Others nodded approvingly. The older ladies whispered among themselves, and more than one seemed to be reconsidering their opinion of the situation. How dare you lecture me about proper behavior? Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing the ugly person beneath. "You're nothing but a servant, a nobody. You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." The ballroom erupted in shocked gasps. Even Victoria's closest friends looked horrified by her outburst. Such open cruelty violated every rule of polite society, and everyone present knew it. David moved to Isabel's side, his face dark with disgust. "Miss Ashford, you've shown your true character tonight, and it's not pretty. I think you owe Miss Crawford an apology." But Isabel held up her hand, stopping him. She had found her voice at last, and she wasn't finished using it. The clock on the hotel wall struck 9 as Isabel felt every eye in the room burning into her skin. Victoria's cruel words hung in the air like poison smoke, and for a moment the old fear crept up her spine like ice water. But then something strange happened. Instead of shrinking away, Isabel felt her grandmother's voice whispering in her memory. "A queen doesn't bow to lesser crowns, child." She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Victoria. "You know what, Miss Ashford? You're absolutely right about one thing." The crowd leaned forward, expecting her to crumble and admit defeat. Even David tensed beside her, ready to jump to her defense. "I do wash clothes for a living," Isabel continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "These hands have scrubbed shirts until they bled. I've worked 14-hour days to keep food on our table while my mother battles sickness." Victoria's smile widened, thinking she had won. But Isabel wasn't finished. "And you know what that makes me? Strong, honest, someone who earns every penny through real work, not by living off Daddy's money." She took a step closer to Victoria, who actually stepped backward. When did working hard become something to be ashamed of? The room buzzed with whispers. Several working men near the back nodded their approval. Even some of the ladies began whispering among themselves, looking uncomfortable. "My grandmother wore this dress to meet kings and queens in Europe," Isabel said, running her hand down the beautiful burgundy fabric. "Not because she was born royal, but because she carried herself like royalty. She taught me that real nobility comes from how you treat others, not from the size of your bank account." Old Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, spoke up from the crowd. "The girl speaks truth. I've watched her care for her sick mother with more devotion than most children show their parents. And she's never missed paying her account at my store," added Mr. Peterson, the grocer, "even when times were hardest." Victoria's face flushed red as murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Her carefully planned humiliation was backfiring spectacularly. "Furthermore," Isabel continued, her confidence building like a river after spring rain, "I've never needed to tear others down to feel better about myself. I've never mocked someone for being different or poor or struggling. That, Miss Ashford, is the difference between us." She turned to address the entire room. "You all invited me here tonight. Some of you meant it kindly, others as a joke. But I came anyway, not to prove I belong in your world, but to show you something important." The ballroom had gone completely silent again, but this time it felt different. Instead of judgment, there was curiosity. Instead of mockery, there was respect growing in many faces. "True worth isn't about fancy dresses or big houses or important names," Isabel said. "It's about how you live your life when nobody's watching. It's about kindness, courage, and standing up for what's right." She looked directly at Victoria one last time. "Thank you for reminding me who I really am." Just as Isabel turned toward the door, planning to leave with her head held high, David Sullivan stepped forward and did something that shocked everyone in the room. He removed his expensive jacket and placed it gently around her shoulders. "Miss Crawford, before you go, I have something to say to this room." The gesture was so unexpected, so protective, that even Victoria gasped. A gentleman giving his jacket to a lady was serious business in 1859. "I've lived in Copper Ridge my whole life," David announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the ballroom. "I've attended every social gathering, every fancy party, every important event this town has ever held." He paused, looking around at faces he had known since childhood. "And in all that time, I have never seen such grace under pressure, such dignity in the face of cruelty, or such genuine beauty as I have witnessed from Miss Crawford tonight." Several ladies in the crowd began nodding. Even some of Victoria's closest friends were starting to look uncomfortable with their leader's behavior. "Moreover," David continued, "I've just realized something that shames me deeply. I've passed Miss Crawford on the street, hundreds of times. I've seen her working, caring for her mother, helping neighbors, and I never truly looked. I never saw past my own shallow assumptions about what makes someone worthy of attention. He turned to face Isabel directly. You, Miss Crawford, are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Not because of that beautiful dress, though you look absolutely stunning, but because of the strength you've shown, the kindness you've demonstrated, and the courage you've displayed tonight. The room held its breath as David took a step closer to Isabel. Would you honor me with one more dance? And then, if you're willing, would you allow me to escort you home? I promise you'll be treated with the respect you deserve. But before Isabel could answer, something unexpected happened. Old Mrs. Henderson began clapping. Then Mr. Peterson joined in. Soon, half the room was applauding, while the other half looked uncertain about what was happening. Victoria stood frozen, her face pale with rage and embarrassment. Her carefully planned evening of entertainment at Isabel's expense had completely fallen apart. I would be honored to dance with you, Mr. Sullivan, Isabel replied, her voice warm with genuine emotion. As they moved back onto the dance floor, other couples began joining them. The musicians struck up another waltz, and the evening continued, but everything had changed. From across the room, Martha Henley watched from the doorway where she had been peeking in to see how her work had turned out. She smiled with satisfaction, remembering Isabel's grandmother and how proud she would have been. As the song ended and David escorted Isabel toward the exit, she realized something important. She hadn't needed their acceptance to be valuable. She had always been worthy of respect and love. Tonight had simply been about remembering that truth and helping others see it too. The doors closed behind them as they stepped into the cool Nevada night, leaving behind a room full of people who would never look at Isabel Crawford the same way again.